When it gets hot outside like this, sometimes you just want a little bit of an Arctic blast. So like I was saying in the intro, this is that time of the year where I live, where it goes from hot to really hot with nothing in between. Even at night, we're still at the really hot part of the spectrum. There have been the occasional rainstorms this year, but we don't talk about those because those are few and far between. With that being said, we're going to take a break from the heat and mentally slide ourselves back in the winter with a little bit of an Arctic blast, a Diamine Arctic blast. Now, this is one of those inks from the 2022 Ink Vent series that is a chameleon and sheening ink. What do we mean by that? It means that we're going to have a little bit of sheen, a little bit of shimmer, and that shimmer is really going to change its dynamic based on how the light is hitting the shimmer particles. And those shimmer particles, yeah, they are kind of numerous. You can see them right here in the bottom of the bottle, but they do behave quite well. Overall, I'd say this is a good ink, and now that Diamine has released the bigger bottles of the 2022 Ink Vent series, yeah, it's a go-to ink for me. There are a few things it can do better, and you'll see those a little bit later on, but overall, this ink has pretty good performance, and I think you'll be pleased, at least for the most part, with how it behaves. So let's go ahead, move past the pleasantries, and get into the KPIs of this wonderful blue ink and see if it's a good fit for your ink shelf. Let's start off this week with the dry times. This ink is completely dry here at the 25-second mark. Although I would say it's page turn dry at about 20 seconds, and yeah, that's pretty much its functional dry time over here on Rhodia, which is actually its best performance, especially out of a broad nib, where you're going to see more of that sheen and more of that shimmer. As we move on over to Tomoe River paper, you can see that this ink does have a bad time. We're sitting here at 30 seconds, and it's not dry. It's page turn dry. You will have a little bit of, soak up on the back of the previous page, but it's not that bad. And if you are a slower writer, or you can tolerate this kind of smearing, then, okay, let's quit trying to sugarcoat it. Do not use this ink on TR. You'll get some good color out of it, but you're not going to get good dry time. For dry time that's passable, stick with Rhodia. You'll have a much better time over here. Which is a little bit of a shame considering I do all of my ink blots here on TR, and I do see more of the dynamic range on display over here as well. I mean, on this paper we at least see the dark blues heading into the mid blues, and we do actually get everything in between. Now, I will say though, this ink, even though it has this good dynamic range here, really shines in these transition tones. We go from the mid blue into a velvet blue, and then fade into a midnight blue that has just a little bit of sheen poking through on the bottom end, and a healthy amount of shimmer that doesn't overpower the ink. Honestly, if we could have this property throughout all of the writing with this ink is a winner 100% of the time, and I'm willing to toss out the dry time results for it. But we don't get that, so it's one of those things where we have to take all the KPIs and try to form those final thoughts. That being said, let's move on to the final one and then see how this ink looks when it's coming out of the pen. And that brings us to the water sample. What we're going to see here as water gets on the page is we're going to get a lot of color lift. I've noticed that with pretty much every sheening and shimmer ink that I've come across, that the primary color layer just immediately disappears the second water comes into play. And that's what we see here on display with Diamine Arctic Blast. And yeah, once water's off the page, it's kind of a bad time. Recovering what you wrote is going to be difficult because the ghosting layer left behind by the color lift. When you've got that much color lift on display, you're going to have a rather large ghosting layer, and that's exactly what we get here. So once again, we have to throw out some of the slow dry time and mediocre water performance to see if this ink really is a keeper. Once again, to me, there's enough going on in the color that yes, it's a keeper for my journal, but let's see if it is for you. And this week we're starting the writing sample over on Rhodia. What I'm noticing right off the bat is that we're getting those deeper blues heading into the transition tones. So for this particular paper, this is a good look. You are getting some of the sheen coming through, and some of the shimmer is showing up as well, at least out of this Kaweco broad nib. If you are using a medium or a fine nib, and you're using a different feed combination, then yes, your mileage may vary, but at least with this combination, we are getting some of the better properties of this ink on display, and when we switch over to print writing, they are hanging around. We still see some of that shimmer, we still see some of that sheen. The one thing we're not getting here, though, is dynamic range. We are staying consistently in those deeper blue tones, and that's just something that you're going to have to expect when you're using this particular ink and paper combination with a fatter nib. And that trend of a bold blue really does continue over here onto Tomoe River paper. One thing I am noticing, though, is we are getting a lot more sheen. Not much more on the shimmer department, but we do see more of that red sheen come from a background feature into a prominent, you're going to see this when you're writing. Once again, this is out of a broad Kaweco nib, so your mileage may vary depending on what you're using to write. But if you do like those fatter nibs, you are going to have a good time, at least with the sheening profile on Tomoe River. Is it Organic Studio Walden Pond level? No. I don't think I've used an ink that ever hits that level, and I don't think I'm going to want to, because I respect my pens. But this ink gives you a good look, and it's something to be considered when you're using an ink for journaling. Does it give you a look that you like? If the answer is yes, then it's an ink that you should use. And to me, that is the final determining factor. The color profile of this ink, the sheening profile of this ink, the hints of shimmer, those bring me a good feeling when I'm using it when I'm writing in my journal. And that's going to do it for our look at Diamine Arctic Blast. If you liked that video or found it useful, hit that like button, get subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.